Hi, my name is Luke, and on behalf of Momentum staff and our church family, I want to thank you for joining us today. If outside of the teaching that you're about to hear, if you would like to connect with what's happening in the life of our church, I want to tell you how you can do that. Go to momentumcc.org/connect, and you'll begin receiving information about what's going on in our church. Also, if you are interested in financially supporting the work that's happening in and through our church, I want to tell you how you can do that as well. Go to momentumcc.org/giving, and it will guide you in how you can give online towards the ongoing work of Momentum. So, you are joining us for a series that we're simply calling Masterpiece, and the basic idea is that God faithfully takes the mess in each of our lives and turns it into a masterpiece. So I don't know if you need a word of encouragement today or even a word of challenge, maybe a different way to see how God might be working in you. Well, we hope that today is an encouragement for you.
This morning, we're kicking off a new series called Masterpiece, and I'm going to start it off like this. I've got one, and you've got one, and everyone we know has one. What I'm talking about is a story. I've got my own story, and you've got a story, and every person you know, everybody, anybody has a story. And the truth is that everybody's story is different. So my story is very likely different than your story. And your story is different than my story, and all of our stories have some similarities, but by and large, there's different components that make our stories, make us who we are. When it comes to the story of my life, and when it comes to the story of your life, if we think back and we look back in retrospect, it's marked by these defining moments and these defining seasons. So when you think back over your life and you're telling your story to your friends, your life group, or somebody kind of says to you, what's your story? And you're telling them that story, there's these moments and there's these seasons of life. So as you share your story with your kids, there are these moments that were pivotal in your marriage or in your life that you'll share with your kids, or when you're someday like telling your stories to your grandkids, there's these pieces and components we tell to them to help understand what life was like for us. Whatever it is, there's those defining moments. Those moments when you look back and it was like just this split moment decision where either you took the opportunity or you didn't take the opportunity. And there's a story to be told in that. Whether you said yes or you said no, there's a reason why you said yes or you said no, and there's a story in that. And for many of us, it's not just defining moments. For some of us, it's defining seasons. And I'm talking about like months or maybe even a couple years of just this long season that you went through where there was wrestle and there was strife and there was these defining things that were happening in the season that helped create you for who you are. So maybe you were going through something or maybe you were struggling through something or you were trying to work something out. It was a difficult time for you professionally. Or maybe for you it was a difficult time personally. There were just some things you were trying to get in order. Maybe for you it was a difficult time in your marriage or a difficult time in your family or a difficult time parenting. But you look back over that season and something about that season of time made an impact on you. It could have been a move to a new place and it just changed it for you. It changed your friend group. It changed how you operated. It changed how you did everything. But it was this season of your life. And often when we think back over these seasons and the narrative that plays in our mind, we can see moments of light. Like I can see moments in my own story that were really good and really positive, and I can see where God showed up in awesome ways. But I also, if I'm being honest, I look back over seasons of my life and I see seasons of darkness. I see seasons where I strayed and wander. I can think back to what it was like in my life before I knew Jesus, and I see moments of darkness there. Even after making the decision to follow Jesus, I see moments of strength. I see these defining moments where I made a decision that I can look back, and I'm proud of that decision because it was a moment of strength for me, but then I also look back over my story and I see seasons of weakness and I kick myself and I beat myself beat myself up over it because here I've made this decision to follow Jesus and I'm trying to do everything I can to follow him with integrity and with truth and like go after him. But then I see these moments of just weakness at times. There's moments of our story that we're proud of and we should be proud of, like what God's done in our hearts and the way he's grown us and shaped us and moved us. Like we should be proud of those things. But there's also parts of our story that we've just stuffed away, like we cram it down deep because we're ashamed of it. We're embarrassed by these things in our past. It's the things that we don't want anybody to know about us. It's the pieces when somebody says, tell me your story, you tell them all the things but those things because it's really just uncomfortable for you to dig that up again. But here's the thing. Those are part of your story. Those moments are part of your story. Those moments are a part of my story. And when you put all of that together, when you put the good together, the bad together, the ugly together, when you put the unforgettable, the unchangeable, unwanted, uninvited, when we put all of those things together, what we get is our story. And the reason our stories matter is because our stories tell our history and they shape our identity. Like as we tell our story to other people, it's telling our stories, it's shaping our identity, and all of those experiences and all of those people that impacted you, both positively and negatively, they're like the words that get written on our heart. So as we share our story, we're ultimately sharing our hearts. Proverbs 27:19 says, as in water, face reflects face, so the heart of a man reflects the man. The place where your story is written, that's the real you. It's the true you. It's the authentic you. The real me. It's found only in our heart. And that's the thing that reveals really what's going on. It's no wonder that the writer of much of the Proverbs also wrote this in Proverbs 4. He says, above all else, guard your heart. Like, why would we guard our heart? Because everything else flows from it. Everything you do flows from your heart. So think about it. Everything you do, if that's true, then the flip side, I would say, is also true. Everything that you don't do, everything you do and everything you don't do flows from what? It flows from our heart. Like it comes from who we are. Our hearts affect how we think, how we act. It affects what we do. It affects how I feel often. My heart will steer me in these directions. So Solomon, the writer of Proverbs, is saying like, this is a big deal. You've got to protect this thing called your heart. You've got to do everything you can to protect your heart. But here's the tension. The condition of your heart is shaped by all kinds of things. It's shaped by life events, some that you control and some you can't control. The condition of your heart is shaped by sin chosen by you and sin done to you. Like the condition of your heart is shaped by your family. Like life events for us have shaped you in some way. Like some of you have wrestled with a chronic illness that has affected you, or a spouse or a loved one has a chronic illness, and that life event has changed you. It's changed how you navigate and how you operate. Or maybe for you, when you think back over your life, one of the defining moments for you was the life event of a divorce of your parents, or some kind of a marital strife that caused tension and separation in some way. That is a defining moment for you. Sometimes life events are things like a premature death or some really big deal your family had to move and operate through. Something has happened to you or you've been a part of that you've just never been able to let go. You've never been able to shake it. It's always just been there. It's the part of your story that is, as much as it hurts and as painful as it is, it's just kind of always there with you. And then there's sin. There's the sin that you've willfully chosen. You've stepped into doing, even though you felt this little thing called your conscience, even though you may have known it wasn't right, you still chose to do it, and that marks you, it shapes you, it stays with you. But then there's also sin that other people do that spills over to you, and it affects you, and that shapes your story. But for most of us, a lot of us, there's nothing that's marked us more than our families. And that can either be a fortunate thing or an unfortunate thing. Our families can be a source of blessing or they can be a source of baggage. It's a thing that we just carry with us, maybe both. Even today, some of our tendencies that we have today, the things that we don't even think about, the things that have just imprinted on us as human beings are part of our families. Like we don't even think about it and we catch ourselves doing it and we're like, that's my mom showing up in me. Like Gosh, I just said exactly what my dad said. Like, it just shows up in us because our families affect us in such a big way. And some of our families were very functional, and some of our families were very dysfunctional. Like, the only thing that you knew was normal is that you put the fun in dysfunctional. Like, it was complete chaos all the time in your family. And truthfully, for a lot of us, it was a mix of both. There was function and dysfunction all in the same family. Like, let me just ask this, like, you don't have to raise your hands, but any of you grow up and, like, find out that your family had secrets, right? Like, we hit this point in age and we're like, oh, this thing that never made sense when I was growing up. And every time this conversation came up, my mom and dad would whisper about this thing and I could never figure it out, but now that I'm older, the secrets have been revealed, like, it all makes sense to me now, right? Like, this shapes us. It helps form our identity. It helps shape our heart. Some of you had parents that told you they loved you every single opportunity. Your home was full of hugs and love and affirmation, and I'm proud of you. And others of you grew up in a home and you can't once remember a mom or a dad telling you, man, I love you. I'm proud of you. And either way, those things shape you. They shape you in one way or another. So when we put all of that stuff together, the life events, the sin, our families, you know what we get? We get a mess. It's a mess. Like, when we throw all of those things in the hopper and we mix them up together, it's just a full-on mess. Let me define mess for you. Mess is a condition of disorder or confusion. Some of you feel that way at times. Like, we just move through life and there's these moments in their season we just feel like things are a complete mess. I'm trying to hang on with everything I have. I'm just trying to grip it all, but it's just chaos around me. Like, we're disordered and we're confused and life is full of problems and difficulties. And some of us here today, like, we're a mess and we know it. Like, we know the mess we're in, we know what we've been going through, and we're vulnerable, we're open with it. We're like, listen, life for me is complete chaos. Like, I'm just trying to survive this thing. But then others in here, like, their life is a mess, but they look really good doing it. You know what they are? They're a hot mess, right? Like, they're the people that, like, look like they have it all together, but like it's spiraling out of control. Like, we've all got that one friend who looks really good, but when we step back, we're like, their life is crazy. Like, she cray. Like, I want nothing to do with this. She's a good friend to have, but I don't want her up in my circle because her life, she's a hot mess. It's like this attractive disaster that's going on. And then there's people that, like, look and they've mastered so well having it all together. And they're the ones that give the image of perfection and the image of, like, everything is neat and clean and proper and I've got everything in order in my life, and you would not know they have a problem at all. But what you and I can't see is the heart. And often their heart's a mess or their mind's a mess, and it's just complete chaos. So let me just let you into a little secret. Mess is what we all have in common. The scripture says it this way in Romans chapter 3. It says, all have sinned. Every single one of us have sinned and we fall short of the glory of God. So everything short of the glory of God is defined as mess. Like, if we fall short of that, that is the standard. That is perfection, and everything that is not perfection is mess. And the story of human history after the Garden of Eden, time and time again, is one mess after another after another. But then what we see is Jesus shows up, and he shows up on the pages of history, and he says, like, I want to offer you a solution. I want to offer you a solution to the mess. And he doesn't give us a plan, he doesn't give us a statement, but instead he offers himself as a solution to the mess. And Jesus steps into history and he says, listen, I want to give you life. I want to reorient your life, and I want to offer you life. And I'm not just going to give you life, but I'm going to give you new life. And I'm not just going to give you new life, but I'm going to give you a new beginning. And I'm going to redeem what was old, and I'm going to make it all new. I'm going to give you a brand new identity. You are my child. You will be my people. I'm going to give you life to the full. That's what he does when he steps into history. And he starts restoring our identity and orienting us to him. And really, that's what so much of the New Testament is about. So much of the New Testament is written to followers of Jesus to remind them of what has happened. It's written to them as a reminder of saying, hey, Jesus did this for you, and here are the effects of it. Here are the consequences of it. Good, here's what it looks like. Here's how it shapes us. Here's how it changes us when Jesus shows up. In one particular letter, there's a guy named Paul, and he does just this. He's reminding a group of Christians by deciding to follow Jesus, here's how it changed things for them. So in Ephesians chapter 2, here's what he says. He says, you were dead in trespasses and sin in which you once walked. So he's saying once upon a time, way back when, however far long ago it was, once upon a time, you were dead. That was my reality, and that was your reality. There was a time when we were dead because of our disobedience and our sins in our life. He says, you were dead in the trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, and the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience. In other words, to keep fitting with the context and what we're talking about, once upon a time in my life, I was a mess. And once upon a time in your life, you were a mess. Once upon a time before we placed our faith in Jesus, this was our truth. This was our identity. This was our reality, is that we were a mess and there was nothing we could do about it. But then he goes on to establish the common thread that we all have. He says, all of us, nobody here, nobody outside of these walls, nobody anywhere is an exception to this. All of us have lived this way. All of us have lived at such a time where we were just in complete chaos, complete mess, complete disobedience. He says, we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind, and were by nature children of wrath like the rest of mankind. What Paul's saying is that because we've been following the passions and the desires and acting on them and making sinful choices of our sinful nature, we were subject to God's wrath and anger just like anyone else. No matter what we look like, no matter how cleaned up we are, no matter how much we try to hide it, we were guilty of it as well. Again, being a mess is the thing that we all have in common. And when I read this, it's actually a really good reminder for me. It's a really hopeful reminder to me for every time I bump up to someone against someone who's made a mess of things. Like typically when we bump up against someone who's made a mess of their life, there's this thing in us that feels like I need to step away, I need to move away, and we start to look down our long judgmental nose at them and we're like, they're a mess. I can't believe they've done this again. But the encouragement, the warning to us is that before we would take the high ground, before we would look down our judgmental nose at them, it's a reminder that mess is what we all have in common. We either used to be a mess, we currently are a mess, or we're really just one bad decision away from being a mess. So Paul says this old reality of yours is there, but something changed. Something happened that changed this former truth in your life. He says this in verse 4. He says, but God being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which he loved us. So we were a mess, but God, who's so rich in mercy, because God loved us so much that he began to change our story. He didn't erase it. He didn't pull out an eraser and just erase the story. He didn't do away with the story. But it says he starts to change the story. He begins to edit the story, that somehow he entered our story and he began to redeem all of the mess. The story of where you came from. The story of what happened to you in life. The story of all the things that you participated in that you're either proud of or ashamed of. In all of those places and spaces that fill our memory, he entered the story and he began redeeming that story. While we were still messes, while we were still in sin, while we were still running, that's when he chose to show his love to us. And nothing we've ever done has scared God away. Nothing that I will ever do will scare him away. It never causes God to say, okay, I'm done with these fools. Like, I can't do this anymore. They're a mess. They're always a mess. They can't get it together. I'm leaving. That's not what he does. In fact, he actually draws near to the mess. God being rich in mercy because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, he made us alive together with Christ. By grace you've been saved and raised us up with him and seated us up with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus. What he's saying is that even when whatever happened, even when you chose to do this, even when you were a mess, even when you were dead because of your sin, God gave us life and he raised us up with Christ Jesus from the dead. And what Paul's saying is it's only by the grace of God that you've been saved. Like, This was his gift. This is his grace. God isn't waiting on you to clean up any mess at all. Like, it's not like our kids in the house when we're like, hey, go clean up the mess, and we're just waiting endlessly for them to actually do something, right? It's like, for the love of all things holy, please get off your rear end and clean up the mess, right? He's not doing that with us. He's not waiting on us to clean up the mess. It was his effort. It was his move towards us. That's the gospel. The gospel is not clean yourself up and get yourself in order and then he will do something for you. It's not get everything in order, get everything prim and proper in your life, look neat and tidy and orderly and pure and holy, and then God can draw near. It's in the midst of your mess, when you're dead, he draws near. And Jesus comes near to us in the mess, and he offers himself as a solution to it all, which is why we call it good news. That's what gospel means, is good news. And he goes on to say, the writer goes on to say that God raised us up alongside Jesus from the dead. So somehow, some way, as he raises Christ up from the dead, he raises us up too, and he seats us with him in the heavenly places. That was a past action that is now our present reality. He seated us with Christ in the heavenly realms, which means that I'm standing on the stage today like it is wood, it is secure, I can stomp it, we can move it, we can load it with people. This is real for me. And you're sitting in somewhat cushy chairs right now, and that is real for you, that will hold you and they'll support you. But there's something even more true than that. There's a greater reality that supersedes this reality that we're currently in. And what Paul's saying is that greater reality, this thing that supersedes everything that we can see with our eyes and that we can feel in this world, that thing is that we've been raised up and seated with Christ in the heavenly realms. And this is the truth for us right now. It's not just someday when. It's not just the promise for life after death. This is happening now. We've been seated with him somehow, some way now. So even though I feel disconnected, even though you walk through seasons where you're like, God, are you even listening to me? I'm praying to you. I'm begging you. Like, I feel like you're not even there right now. Even in those moments when he feels distant, in the moments when he feels so far from us, Paul says that the greater reality is despite what we feel, despite what we think we can sense, we have been seated with Christ, and he is with us. God has now entered the story, and he's pronounced a new reality over our life. And what's most true about you and me, there's all kinds of true things about us, but what's most true about you and I as followers of Jesus is that when God came near, he so loved the world that he would come near to us, that he would step into our mess and offer us a new reality as he offered himself as the solution to the mess. And what this means for us is that you may feel like your life is a mess right now. Hot mess, normal mess, whatever kind of mess. You may feel like life is out of control for you. If there's parts of your life that you can't just get your arms around, this is an opportunity for you to meet and experience God. Because even though he may seem far away in the midst of the mess, even though it may seem like, again, he's just not listening, can't hear you, your voice isn't carrying far enough, even in the midst of all of that, he is actually stepping towards you. God doesn't care about the mess as much as he cares about you. Like, that's the thing that he ultimately cares about is you and me. We're his prized creation. He created us to reflect his glory. He wants to restore and redeem us. He's not afraid of the mess. He's not worried about the mess. He wants to draw near to us and repurpose us for his glory. And this is what we see happening throughout the Gospels time and time again, is that Jesus is navigating in and out of the mess of people's lives. It's what he did throughout his entire ministry. It's the way he operated. Why? Because of this. So that in the coming ages, he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace and kindness towards us in Christ Jesus. For grace you've been saved through the faith, and it's not by your own doing, it's the gift of God, not as a result of works, so that no one may boast. Listen, you probably have parts of your story that you hate. I have parts of my story that I hate. There are parts of my story that I am ashamed of. There are parts of my story that turn my stomach. There are parts of my story that I'm very uncomfortable with. There's parts of my story that I'm embarrassed by. There's parts of my story that I don't really want to tell people. But the truth is we can never forget those things. There's no just moving them aside. There's no just kicking them out. There's no just saying like, this didn't happen in my life. That's not the reality. The reality is those things are there. The reality is those things happened. The reality is those things changed and shaped us in some way. But God restores and redeems them. We can't forget them because our stories point to what grace can do. Like, that's what I love. I love anytime somebody is so honest and vulnerable that they share all the messy of their story, all the ugly things of their story. Because every time they do that, it is this giant beacon pointing to grace. It says, this is what I did, this is who I was, and this is how God redeemed me. It's really Paul's way of saying that we all become trophies in the trophy case of God. Like we're trophies of grace on display. And he says, God saved you by his grace. Like it was his effort, it was his initiation. He saved you by his grace when you believed, and you don't get to take credit for it. It wasn't your work, it wasn't your doing, it was all him. It was his move. It's not a reward for the good things that we do. It's not a reward for our church attendance. It was him moving towards us. Then Paul, after taking us through this entire journey, I love this because he takes us in the very heart of God. In Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10, he says this. It says, for we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. So we are, present tense, right now, God's workmanship. We are, despite all the things that have happened, despite the mess in our lives, right now we are his workmanship. We are his masterpiece is what this word really looks like in the Greek. Not someday to be, not in heaven, not in kingdom come, but right now we are his workmanship. We are his masterpiece. And what Paul is saying is what's most important about you, the greatest reality of your life and the greatest reality of my life is that when God looks at us, he doesn't see a loser. When he looks at us, he doesn't see failure. When he looks at us, he doesn't see hypocrite. When he looks at us, he doesn't see someone who just struggles with inconsistencies. What he sees is the masterpiece. He sees the vision of what he wants us to be. And like every great piece of art, every great sculpture, there's constant crafting and editing and molding to create the masterpiece that it is. And that's what God looks at when he sees us. He sees the collection of all of our stories and how he will use them and redeem them and create something beautiful out of them. So the truth is, our lives are messy, but they're not over. Like even right now, if you find yourself in this room today in the middle of a mess, struggling with doubt, struggling with disbelief, struggling with sin that has just held you captive, here's what I want to assure you. God is writing a story. He's writing a story with you and me, and he's creating a masterpiece. So for those of you that are followers of Jesus, I would say this, that you are not your worst moment. You're not defined by that thing. You're not the sins of your past. Yes, they're there. Yes, they're part of your story, but it is not who you are. You're not the sin of your present. Even as you struggle and as you work through those things, you aren't defined by that. You are so much more than that. You're not defined by your guilt. You're not defined by your mess. You are a masterpiece in the hands of the Creator. And your life is a story of the trophy of grace that he's putting on display. And if you've never yet made the decision to follow Jesus, here's what I would say. Like all of us, your life's a mess. The only difference is those of us who have made a decision to follow Jesus are saying, yep, I own it. This is where life is chaos for me. This is where sin has reigned. I've tried to fix it. I've tried to control it. I've tried to white knuckle it. I've tried to do it all on my own, and I can't do it anymore. Got to give it up to you. And that's the invitation for you. God's not going to just erase your past, but what he promises to do is to redeem it, to restore it, to rebuild it. He doesn't just take the eraser and do away with those pieces, but instead he invites us to trust in him with the most painful decisions of our past and our present and allow him to create something new.
Hey, once again, my name is Luke, and I just want to thank you for joining us today. I mentioned this earlier, but if you want to connect, go to momentumcc.org/connect. You can fill out the form there, and you'll begin getting information from us. If you would like to give towards the ongoing work of our church, go to momentumcc.org/giving, and you'll find instructions on how to do that there. Lastly, if you just wanted to more so connect right now, I want to tell you how you can do that. You can find our church on both Facebook and Instagram. We'd love for you to follow us there. And if this information that you've just watched was helpful to you, maybe you could subscribe to our channel on YouTube and keep getting that sent your way. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great week.